Hey, everybody. Welcome to the House in the Trees podcast. And yes, this is John DeVito. You may recognize my name from the John DeVito show. For a while, I'm going to be changing my podcast name to the House in the Trees podcast. And for a variety of reasons, I'm going to get away from politics for a little bit and talk about some other things that also matter to me. And who knows, at some point, I might go back to the name, the John DeVito show. But from this point on, for the time being anyway, I am now known as House in the Trees podcast. So hopefully you enjoy it. And let me tell you a quick story as to why I named the podcast that. When my children were little, I have four children, as many of you know. And my daughter, who's now 18 years old, she's a freshman in college. When she was little, we would go away on vacations. We would, go away for the day. We would go to the beach or whatever it may be. My daughter, when she was little, she was this little cute blonde with blue eyes, blonde curly hair. Going out with her when she was little was like going out with a rock star. I mean, literally everybody stopped us. Your daughter's so cute. She's so beautiful. So anyway, she was adorable. And she was daddy's little girl, and she still is. So when we were away on a vacation, she would always say, Mommy and Daddy, I want to go home to our house in the trees. So when I was thinking of a name for a podcast, I was thinking up all different types of names. And this just kind of popped into my head as something that really has sentimental meaning to me. And so I named it that. So anyway, from now on, the podcast is House in the Trees podcast. And at some point, I might go back. And maybe at some point, I'll explain why I changed the name. But that day is not going to be today because today I'm going to be talking about something that's very difficult for me. This is my first podcast in well over a month. And the reason why I'm coming back today is this day today is about 3 weeks after the day that my father, Ralph DiVito, passed away. So many of you know that I've had a long, long journey taking care of my dad. And my dad, at the age of roughly 75 years old, had a stroke and he ended up getting vascular dementia. Now, for anybody out there that does not understand how difficult dementia and Alzheimer's disease is on people, I hope you never, ever find out. The last 7 years have been some of the most difficult years of my life, watching my dad slowly go downhill and just progress with this horrible, terrible disease that literally just steals your life away from you. I mean, it's just awful to watch the whole thing happen. So before I get into what happened, now at the end of his life, I was in the hospital with him. And what happened at the end, I think really will change my life forever. It was an amazing end of life for him. It was beautiful in a lot of ways. While it was very difficult, the end was something that I didn't expect. And it was something that I may even have a hard time explaining. It was just an amazing experience. So I'll explain that to you. But before I do that, before I talk about what happened at the end of my dad's life in the hospital when I was with him, I want to talk a little bit about his life and hopefully pay homage to the life that he led. Now, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to read to all of you his obituary. Now, I wrote this obituary myself, and I wrote it with the help of family members. They all gave me input. My sister, my daughter, and others. So I wrote this obituary, and I tried to capture his life the best I could. So I thought this was a pretty good obituary, and it really gives you a short idea of what my father was about over the course of his life. And it makes us all realize that as you go through life, we all have challenges. We all have things to deal with that are very difficult. We all have a host of problems that we're all working on at the same time. I mean, your problems may be different than my problems and may be different than the next person's problems, but we all have problems, and this life can sometimes be very difficult. But when you look at a person's life and you summarize their life into a few paragraphs, and you look at the accomplishments, the general broad strokes of a person's life, and you see how many amazing things they actually accomplished, it just shows you that many of us, while we maybe don't see it while we're living, because I'm not sure my father always saw it, but when we don't always see it, When you look at a summary of someone's life and you realize all the amazing things they had a great life. And a lot of times we have had great lives that we're just not giving ourselves enough credit for. So, for all of you, take a moment to sit back, consider your life, think about some of the things you've done, think about some of the differences you've made in other people's lives and how you've improved other people's lives. And that is really such a powerful thing, and that's what it's all about. So, let me get into read my dad's obituary, and then we're going to talk a little bit about his life, and then I'm going to tell you about what happened at the end, which really caught me by surprise, and I'm still, quite honestly, a little freaked out in a good way, I guess, by what happened. So, without further ado, let me get into the obituary. I'm going to try to read this, and then we'll go into talking a little bit about my father's life. So, Ralph DiVito passed away peacefully at UMass Memorial Hospital in Worcester, Massachusetts, at the age of 83 on February 23rd, 2024. Ralph was born and raised in Amesbury, Massachusetts. He graduated from Amesbury High School in 1958. He had fond memories of growing up in Amesbury and often told heartwarming stories about his childhood friends, which he did often. He was very proud of his father immigrating from Bugnara, Italy at the age of 16 years old. He was an outstanding athlete, playing football, basketball, and baseball. He captained all three teams and received 8 varsity letters. He was inducted into the Amesbury High School Athletic Hall of Fame in 2015. He was also inducted into the Northeast Baseball League Hall of Fame. His parents, Ralph and Leontine Loisel DeVito, were his biggest fans. They were always there to cheer him on at all of his games. Upon graduation from high school, he enlisted in the Air Force and proudly served his country. When in the Air Force, he continued his sports career playing baseball and football for the Air Force. He led the baseball team to the European Championship while stationed in Germany. Throughout his baseball career, he was a 16-time batting champion and one of the most feared hitters in the area. He drew interest from several major league teams, including the Boston Red Sox, the Chicago Cubs, the Baltimore Orioles, the Houston Astros, who at the time were known as the Houston Colt 45s. When Ralph returned from the Air Force, he worked in a shoe factory and began pursuing his college degree at Merrimack College in Massachusetts. He worked full-time during the day and attended night school for 9 years before getting his degree in business in 1973. He was the first person in his family to graduate from college. Upon graduation from college, he started a career at the Internal Revenue Service. He was a well-respected revenue officer. He was known for his work ethic and the fair manner in which he treated the people who had complicated tax issues. He worked for the Internal Revenue Service for 28 years until his retirement in 2001. So Ralph married the love of his life, Joan Schiller DeVito. She was an RN, and they got married in 1965. He was a loyal and loving husband for 42 years until she passed in 2007 due to muscular dystrophy. He took wonderful care of her as she battled a challenging disease throughout her life. They had 2 children. Ralph and Joan worked hard and bought their dream house in the picturesque small town of Atkinson, New Hampshire. They raised their family in this beautiful small town in southern New Hampshire. Ralph lived in Atkinson for over 50 years. He will always be remembered for his involvement in youth sports. Ralph loved coaching youth sports leagues in Atkinson. He coached baseball, football, and basketball. He went on to coach the Timberlane Babe Ruth team to 3 consecutive championships and continued on to coach Timberlane's senior Babe Ruth baseball teams. Ralph deeply loved his 2 children. His daughter Susan resides in Wakefield, Massachusetts. His son, me, resides in Rutland, Massachusetts with his wife Cheryl and his 4 grandchildren, Matt, Caitlin, Ethan, and Brandon. Excuse me. He also has dozens of cousins and relatives from the Amesbury area. This That includes members of the Loisel, Roy, and Michaud families. In his spare time, Ralph loved the beaches in New Hampshire and Maine. He went to Hampton Beach a lot. He enjoyed visiting the White Mountains of New Hampshire and traveling to North Conway. Ralph and Joan also enjoyed traveling to the islands and visited Hawaii, Aruba, Barbados, and the Turks and Caicos Islands, to name a few of their trips. He enjoyed coffee with his friends at Heavenly Donuts for many years. He also looked forward to monthly lunches at the Winner's Circle in Salisbury, Massachusetts, with high school friends from Amesbury and Newburyport. Ralph was predeceased by his father, Ralph DiVito, his mother, Leontine Loisel DeVito, his wife, Joan Schiller DeVito, and just had a wonderful life. So the services we had were in Amesbury, Massachusetts, which were his hometown, and we had a beautiful service. Now you have to remember, my dad was 83 years old. A lot of our family members, the older family members, have passed away over the years, and a lot of his friends have also passed away. And we didn't know what to expect, so we scheduled his funeral services for a funeral home that his entire family has used over the years, E.V. Jutras in Amesbury, Massachusetts. We scheduled this funeral, and we had like a wake and then a small service after the wake. And we had a turnout like I could have never expected. We met friends of his that were childhood friends from his neighborhood that were still with us. We met high school friends. We met people that had worked with him over the years that we didn't know. We ended up meeting people that he played sports with that we hadn't met before, people from later in life, from the town he lived in for many years in New Hampshire. It was a beautiful event. I mean, it was hard, but it was beautiful. And as I mentioned earlier, my father struggled for many years with Alzheimer's and dementia. And for the people out there that have been through this, you know what it's like. They call it the long goodbye, and they call it that for a reason, because it is an absolutely just heartbreaking way to watch a loving person in your family eventually lose their memory, lose many of the executive functioning skills that allow them to operate on a daily basis, then start to lose their physical capabilities, and eventually end up in a very difficult place at the end of their lives. And that's where my father ended up. But when I think about the course of my dad's life, when I think about him growing up in a small town, his family did not have a lot of money. His parents were immigrants. They worked in factories. They never had a lot. He grew up poor. But my father worked very, very hard in his life. My father went out and, really squeezed the most he could out of his sports talents. Then he went into the military, got training there. And then when he came out, the story about him working all day in factories and then going to school at night, 2, 3, 4 nights a week to go to college was amazing. It took him 9 years of working all day in factories and going to college at night to get his degree. And eventually, at the age of 33 years old, he became the first person in his family to graduate from college. I mean, that is powerful. That changed the course of our family and really showed myself and my sister what it was like to work hard for a goal. We learned from him just by watching. We watched how hard he worked. We watched how much effort he put into everything. And we did learn from him that through hard work and getting an education, you can have a successful life. And we learned so much from him. And then there were other things that we learned from him over the years. When my mother was sick, my mother had muscular dystrophy for many years. We found out she was sick when I was 5 years old, and she ended up passing away back in 2007 at the age of 67 years old. So she battled muscular dystrophy for a very long time. And for the last 2 to 3 years of her life, she was in really rough shape. I mean, she was wheelchair bound. She was incontinent. And the last 6 months to a year of her life, she was bedridden in the house almost all the time, where my father was taking care of her 24/7, changing her diapers, doing all the things he had to do to take care of his wife. So for many years, I've always thought I would never be able to do what my father did when it came to taking care of my mother. What he did for her was nothing short of heroic. And on his deathbed, I told him that. Now, let's fast forward ahead to the end. We're already at 15 minutes here, and I don't want to make this podcast too long, but I also want to do my father fair justice in this tribute to his life. At the end, for the last 2 weeks of his life, he ended up in a nursing home because we just could not take care of him anymore. The months leading up to that, he was in and out of the hospital, in and out of geriatric psychiatry, trying to get medications right to help him with hallucinations and all the other issues he was having. He didn't know where he was. He was confused. He thought he was, still working. I mean, he just was struggling, and it was so painful to watch. So he went into a nursing home for only about 2 weeks. My sister went in to see him on a Sunday, and I had been there earlier in the week. And on the Sunday she went, he was in his chair, and he just did not look good. So she told the nurse, and eventually that day my father was sent off to the emergency room. So I went to the emergency room that night, and our initial goal was to hopefully save him. He was really struggling. He had a variety of issues. He had sepsis. His heart rate was racing. His breathing was failing. He was having just multiple issues. So we tried everything we could. And I've got to say, the doctor, I wish I could remember his name, at UMass in Worcester, he had to be one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. I mean, he was astonishing to speak to. He was a genius. He explained everything to me perfectly and tried everything he could do to stabilize my dad. I mean, it was really amazing to listen to this guy talk. And he was so good at his job. And I don't think I've ever met a doctor that I was impressed with as much as this guy. And I wish I remembered his name because I would share it now. But we were obviously upset and not really thinking about some of the details at that point, like names. So anyway, we spent a full 24 hours trying to do whatever we could to save my dad. And it just wasn't going to happen. So we had to make the decision, and it was my decision, being that I was his healthcare proxy and his executor. I had to make the decision to switch the focus to life care at the very end. So they ended up moving him to the critical care unit. And he was in there for 3 days. And I have to say that the people in the critical care unit, just an amazing group of people. They bent over backwards to help us. They really went out of their way to take care of my dad. They were just caring, loving people. And it was just touching to see how much they did to help him in the end. It was beautiful. So my sister and I ended up sleeping in the hospital several nights in a row. My wife slept over one night. The kids came in, and they got to say all the things they wanted to say to my father. I did as well. My sister did as well, and my wife. We all had private time to talk with him. In the end, he couldn't really speak, but I could put my hand in his hand and ask him if he could hear me, and he would squeeze my hand so we knew he could hear us. So he spent 3 days in the CCU, and then at that point they transitioned him back to a regular hospital room because the end was going to happen. It was pending. So we got down to the hospital room. He was down there for one night. My sister and I slept in the room. And then the next day I went home for the majority of the day while my sister and my wife stayed in the room. I came back later in the day. My sister went to take a break with my wife, and my daughter stayed with me, my amazing daughter, who is 18 years old and was an absolute rock for me. It amazed me that she could be as composed as she was and as amazing as she was throughout what was happening with her grandfather passing away before her eyes, and she wanted to stay with me. And she was amazing. She was so caring and so wonderful. I couldn't have been prouder of my daughter during this difficult time. So anyway, we're in the room, and we started reading articles because his breathing was becoming labored, and they were giving him more medication to help him because he was in pain. He was afraid, and his breathing was becoming more like distant, like the breaths were not coming as frequent. So my wife told me, she's a doctor, she was telling me that sometimes at the end, breaths could happen like one every minute, one every 2 minutes, sometimes even as few as one every 5 minutes. And this could go on for days. So unfortunately, my sister had left and she wanted to be there when my father passed. And this is the one thing I wish I could change. I wish she would have been there. It really broke her heart to miss my father passing, but there's nothing you can do. My father made the choice that it was his time to go. But let me explain how that happened. And this is where the story, to me, gets amazing. So my father was struggling. My daughter, he had a fever. He was struggling breathing. He was in pain. He was afraid. And he, for 4 days, fought to keep breathing. And that just showed me the type of drive, passion, and resilience this man had. The people in the hospital were shocked that he lasted 4 days, but he was fighting and fighting and fighting for his life. So people tell you a lot of times, you got to tell them it's okay to go. And during the course of the week, I did that a few times, but nothing really happened. So when I really saw him struggling, I knew he was afraid. And I just decided to do this. Now, you have to realize this was also difficult for me, where I came from an older generation of family, and we didn't really talk about our feelings too much. And my father and I, even though we both loved each other, we didn't say it a lot, and we didn't really express how we felt a lot to each other. And I think that was just the sign of the times, or maybe it's just the way it was in my family. I don't know. But anyway, he was really struggling. My daughter was talking to him, so I finally came up. I leaned over my father, and I started rubbing his chest. I said, "Dad, it's me, John. I'm here with Caitlin. I want to let you know that your grandchildren love you. I love you. Your daughter Susan loves you. Your daughter-in-law Cheryl loves you. Your friends all love you, and they've been asking about you. I said, you have had an amazing life. I said, you were a great athlete. You served your country in the Air Force. I said, you were a father that was loyal and was always there for us and provided whatever we needed when we needed it. You took care of our mother like a hero. It was heroic what you did for all those years, taking care of your wife when she became sick, when the two of you were both still young. I said, you have had a beautiful life. And I said, I want you to know that I believe this fully in my heart. I believe that when you leave this place and you leave this body, you will be going to a better place, a beautiful place, whether you call it heaven or whatever it may be, you're going to be going there. A priest came in and already forgave you for whatever sins you may have thought you committed during your life. So you have a clean slate. And I said, I believe that your mother and father, your grandparents, your cousins, my in-laws, your friends, and mom are all waiting for you there. And you are going to be with all of them again once you let yourself pass. So, Dad, you've been fighting, and I want to let you know it's okay to go. You're going to be okay. We're going to be okay. And I said, I believe this with all of my heart. It was very emotional, very hard to say, but it came through the heart. It came from the heart. And I didn't think when I said this, he was going to pass. I just wanted him to again know how I felt. And I figured, okay, maybe it's going to be tomorrow, maybe the day after. At this point, there was no indication that he was going to give up and move on. So I finished saying what I said, and I continued to rub his chest and told him, Dad, it's okay. Dad, it's okay. My father breathed maybe 3 or 4 more times, and then his breath stopped. Just like that, his breath stopped. And I remember looking, and I couldn't believe it. I was just like, oh my God, is he gone? Or is this one of those things where he's going to start breathing again 2 or 3 minutes from now? I didn't know. So my daughter and I were just in the room. We were both still. We didn't really say anything. And then finally, I looked at her and I said, is he gone? And she's like, I think he is. And we were both in shock. So at this point, when we realized that he'd actually passed, I'm not going to lie, I started crying. I started crying pretty heavy. I texted my wife, I kind of regret doing this, and I just said he's gone because I was so upset I wasn't able to call anybody. And I think I probably should have called people and told them that he was sick, but I wasn't thinking in the right state of mind at that point because I was just so distraught that my father had died. So they were already on their way back to the hospital. And unfortunately, my wife and my sister missed it. And I'm heartbroken that that happened because I know it was important for my sister to be in the room, and I wish she could have been there. I really do. But that being said, I started crying. My daughter comforted me, and she hugged me, and she rubbed my back and just took care of me like an absolute champion. She did it in the same way that my father took care of my mother. My daughter took care of me. And, it was honestly just a beautiful moment. It really was. So the whole thing was horrible because we just lost our father and, Caitlin lost her grandfather. But in the same breath, we were able to say what we needed to say to my father and to watch him believe in his heart that it was okay to move on. It was okay to leave this planet and move on to heaven. And I sincerely hope that my father is in heaven with my mother, with his loved ones, and back with a lot of the people that he's missed for the last several years. So that's what happened. So for all of you out there, I'm a little bit longer than I like to be on these podcasts right now. But one of the things I've learned at this point in my life, I'm 56 years old. My kids are growing up. Both of my parents are in heaven. My grandparents are gone. And really now, this is kind of scary, I guess I'm the patriarch of the family. And during the course of your life, for younger people that may be listening out there, when you're young, you worry so much about making sure you have the right clothes and the right car. And you worry so much about your grades, and you worry about so much about your education. You worry so much about your job, and then you worry about so many things when you have a family. Your kids not getting invited to a birthday party. You get concerned about your kids not being invited to a team, or making a team when they try out. And these things are all very difficult to deal with. And so many of us are just concerned about money, having money. And don't get me wrong, money is important. It makes life easier. We don't have to stress about bills. But really, when it comes down to it, as I'm now 56 years old, and let's face it, I'm on the back nine right now of my life, and I can say that it's okay. But when you get to be my age and you start to lose parents and you lose grandparents and you lose family members and you start to realize how fragile and how quick life passes, it makes you realize that so many of those little things that you worry about during the course of your life just don't matter. They don't matter. What really matters is your family, your loved ones, your friends, making sure that you're happy, going after what's true in your heart, chasing the things in life that really matters. The superficial things in life don't matter. Whatever type of car you drive, how big your house is, how much money you have in the bank, those things don't matter. It's not what life is about. Life is about living a good life, helping others, making other people's lives better, and doing whatever you can during the course of your life to enjoy as much time as you can with your family members, with your loved ones. If you're angry with someone in your family, I encourage you to make up with them. Reach out to them. Take the high road, even if you feel the other person was wrong. Rekindle that friendship. Rekindle that relationship with a parent or a sibling that you may be fighting with, because there is going to come a day when that person or you is no longer with us, and it's going to be too late to fix some of those issues you've had in some of those areas of your life. So for all of you out there, life is short. Embrace your life. Spend time with your children. Spend time with your parents. Spend time with your grandparents. We all get busy, but find the time to spend time with your loved ones, because before you know it, life moves on without all of us. I'm at a point now where, I'm a little bit older, obviously, as I mentioned, 56. My kids are still living at home for the most part. My son who's 21's at home, and my daughter's in college now, so she's away from home. But my younger two are still in high school, so I got married a little bit later. But there will come a day when all those baseball games you're complaining about going to, all those soccer games you're going to, you complain about your schedule being so busy. There is going to come a day when all that's over. And there is going to come a day when your children have their own families. And there is going to come a day when you're home alone, a lot more than you had been for a long time. And for me, the one thing I've always tried to think about is when it's later in my life, when I'm on the shuffleball court or the pickleball court in Florida, or I'm on my deathbed, I want to try to live my lives having as few regrets as possible. And no one's going to get there. No one's going to have no regrets in their lives. I mean, that's impossible to accomplish. But I want to have as few as possible. And that's how I'm trying to live my life from this point on. During the course of my life, I've made many, many mistakes. I'm far from perfect. I grew up and, I had periods of my life that were very challenging. And I had periods of my life where I didn't live it the right way. And I haven't always been the person that I want to be. But the good news is for all of us, we all still have time. If you feel like you're not on the right path, or you feel like you're not doing the right things in your life, we can always change. We can always change. I've changed so many times over the years. I've reinvented myself so many times over the years. And I feel so very fortunate for the life that I had. Growing up in the beautiful small town of Atkinson, New Hampshire, where I lived my childhood. I mean, it truly was a picturesque town. It was a small town. Typical small town things happened in that town. But I was fortunate to have wonderful friends growing up as a child. I'm still friends with many of these people at this point in my life. And I can't tell you how fortunate I feel to know some of the people that I know, some of the friends that I have, some of the acquaintances that I have from my childhood, and some of the people that even taught me over the years, my teachers, and the people like that I was so fortunate to have in my lives that helped guide me along the path. I feel fortunate for being able to play sports in college. I feel fortunate to have the career that I've had. I feel extremely fortunate to be living in another town that is, I guess, like my second hometown, even though now I've lived in this town for longer than the town I grew up in, the beautiful central Massachusetts town of Rutland, Massachusetts. It's a wonderful town with phenomenal people. It's a great community where it is literally like growing up in a movie, where in Little League, the kids have a Little League parade that marches down the center of the town. We have a 4th of July celebration like you've never seen in this small town. We have fireworks before Christmas. We have all these small town gatherings. And there are just some of the nicest people you'd ever want to meet who are living in this town that give back into the community and do so many things for the children. It's been in a lot of ways a very storybook life, and I'm so fortunate, and I'm trying to sit back and reflect on the many, many, many good things that I've had. We can all reflect on bad things in our lives. We've all had bad things happen, but that's not where we want to be. We want to try to create the good, create good memories, create good relationships, and then when you have the chance, reflect back on the good things and try to forget about the negative things. Try to forget about the bad things. I mean, we can't completely forget about everything, but you can't dwell on it, because if you dwell too much on your past, it ruins your future. So for everybody out there, many of you have been listening to my podcast for a few years. I'm temporarily changing the format. Who knows, it may stay like this. And as again, I explained to you why I named it this. House in the Trees podcast is based on a term that my daughter used to say when she was a little girl, saying that she wanted to go home to our house in the trees. So I'm getting away from getting my name off the podcast for a little bit, and I'm just going to go this route. So hopefully all of you continue to come back. I'm going to be trying to talk about more feel-good stories, feel-good things, and have more fun podcasts and get away from the polarizing issues that I feel that are separating a lot of us in this country. So for all of you, I hope you enjoyed the tribute to my dad. We're going to miss him, Ralph DiVito. He was a great father, a great role model, and I'll tell you, it's difficult. The few weeks after the passing, I'm almost a month out now from his passing, and the stuff we brought home from the night of the wake and the service are still in boxes in my garage. All the financial paperwork that we have to do and dealing with his house, I've just avoided all of that. I just don't feel I don't know, I guess the motivation to get all that stuff done because I'm still in mourning, but it's okay. That stuff will all get done. And I'm sure this is going to be a long, long time before I feel back to myself. Losing my mother, I know, was very, very difficult. I felt horrible for months on end. And now to know that both of my parents are gone, it's a strange feeling knowing now that, wow, I'm kind of here by myself. I mean, not really by myself because I've got, a wife and children, but those older mentors, those older family members that taught you the ways of life are now all gone. And that's a little bit scary and it's a little bit humbling. But in the same breath now, having the thought of thinking of my dad up in heaven with my mother. My mother wasn't healthy for a very long time in her life. So thinking about the two of them, maybe being together, being healthy and being happy, just brings joy to my heart and it makes me happy to even think about that. So I'm hoping that's the way it is and hoping they're all going to be there when it turns out to be my time. So for everybody, I hope you all enjoyed this podcast. I want to thank all of you for tuning in, for all the people that download this. I do get a lot of downloads in this podcast, and I hope all of you are going to like this new format. It's going to be, for a while, a kinder, gentler podcast for me that's going to focus on positivity more than negativity, because that's really what I want to put out into the universe, this point going on. And maybe this experience with my dad's changed me internally. It may have. I don't know. But I want to wish all of you the very, very best. I love all of you. For every person, I've said this many times, for every person that comes onto my podcast and spends their time listening to me talk, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I don't listen to my own podcast because I hate listening to myself, but I do get messages from people that talk about how they've been inspired by some of the podcasts that I do. And that, I'm telling you right now, that gets me right in the heart. I don't make money off of this. This is something I do because it's a passion. I speak from the heart. Hopefully that comes through on the podcast. And for the people that do enjoy it, I thank you. I can't thank you enough. It really warms my heart. It makes me feel, again, that I have a purpose in doing this. So I love all of you. I love each and every one of you. I wish I could give you a hug, a handshake, or a fist bump, but just know that I'm doing it right now through the podcast. All right, everybody, have a great weekend, and thank you for tuning in to this podcast about my dad and his passing back on February 23rd of 2024. Okay, I love all of you, and take care.